And in short, that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm an existential psychotherapist. I'll talk a bit more about that perhaps. But I believe that the ayahuasca experience can be, not always, not for everyone, can be profound and contribute to what I call insight and greater well-being. I stay away from the language of mental health generally. I think there's too much medicalization of distress. I don't consider myself in the medical world as a psychotherapist. I talk, that's that's what I do. I like this. It's a conversation between fellow human beings that are co-suffering in this existence. And to tell you a little bit more about me and how I ended up there on this floor of this Maloka, I was a computer programmer for the first 20 years. I worked in digital marketing for the first 20 years. And then I got into some practices, meditation, yoga, ayahuasca, things like 5 rhythms, things like sauna. I think there are many ways up the mountain. Ayahuasca has been an important part of mine. And it shifted my focus. It shifted my idea of what I wanted to do with this one short, precious life. And I retrained as a psychotherapist. The Hindus have an idea that you spend the first third of your life learning, the second third of your life serving, and the third third learning to die, preparing for death. And I think as I approach 40, I'm headed into this middle period where serving is becoming more important to me. Working in advertising, selling little pots of yogurt and cars just wasn't cutting it for me. And so I switched and I retrained. And one way or the other, that led me to this sort of biological experience of ayahuasca, which is, should I explain what ayahuasca is? Shall I start from the start? Or do you all already know, fully paid up members of the Psychedelic Society? I won't make you put your hand up and say, I don't know what ayahuasca is. That would be embarrassing. Let me tell you what it is in really, really basic terms. What I mean by ayahuasca is this Amazonian plant medicine. It's a brew that is derived primarily from 2 different plants, the bark of the Banisteriopsis carpi and the leaves of the Psychotria viridis bush. I'm going to ask you in a minute, actually. You could help me out and tell me what you're interested in. I'd really like to know. I might write it down, actually, because I don't just want to talk at you for the next hour and then maybe ask some questions at the end. I'd rather sort of weave that in. So if you can think what's brought you here tonight, I'm not going to ask you quite yet. If you think, what is it? And you can ask me anything. Ask me absolutely anything. It can sound as naive and stupid as you want. It can sound as educated and informed as you want. Don't be scared. Please just tell me what it is that you're curious about. It could be personal stuff. I might like to talk about kind of academia. I've just started a PhD that continues my master's research into ayahuasca and psychotherapy. It could be about where to get it, how to get into taking psychedelics and taking ayahuasca. It could be about your own experiences. Maybe there's something you want to share. I'll be open to hearing that. It could be a critical view of, don't people die? Aren't the dangers? Do we need to talk about that? It could be about the sexual abuse that happens in some shamanic circles. There's all sorts of things. There's so much, not all of which I'm an expert on, but I might be able to, most of which I'm not an expert on, but some of which I can signpost you on and tell you where we're at in terms of some of the literature that I've reviewed, at least. So I'm very open to taking a direction from you guys collectively and individually. But back to ayahuasca as a thing. So it's a concoction of these 2 plants. They work together in the body. The Chacruna bush has dimethyltryptamine, DMT, maybe more familiar with it. That gets a lot of attention. People talk about the active ingredient. I'm fairly critical of an idea of an active ingredient because I'm a holistic therapist. I don't take a part of the person, I take all of the person. And so for me, there's very much a view of a biopsychosocial spiritual view, at least those 4 things, rather than just looking at the biological aspect. But the biological and scientific view does have a privilege in our society. And so you could say that there are mechanisms that go on within the body where the ayahuasca vine has harmine and harmaline and a variety of other alkaloids that act, and they make the DMT and the chacruna psychoactive so that it can pass through the blood-brain barrier. And so these two plants work together. Some people talk about the amazing fact that of the tens of thousands of plants in the forest that the ancients, maybe hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago possibly, found these two plants to bring them together, and they work together in such a sort of seemingly magical way that one unlocks the power of the other. Some talk about them in terms of male and female energies, and yeah, if you drink this brew, then you'll go on a journey of perhaps 3, 4, 5 hours. It's more intense in the first hour. And then it settles down, and you hope to get to what I call, and what Joe Tarfur calls a sort of working dose, a sort of working space, which I very much wasn't in the experience I told you about at the start. It still helped me in other ways. I thought I wanted to go into that experience asking about my family, about my relationships, maybe about my clients. Like, how do I get insights into my life? Am I doing the right thing? And Ayahuasca just went, what, you think that's all real? You think they exist? What are you talking about? It went straight for the jugular, felt literally for the jugular, and really shakes your foundations of, well, what is real? What can I trust? What do I know? What is me? What can I hold on to? And so for me, after the ceremonies that I've been through, typical experiences would include a tour of loved ones. There's a great book by Benny Shannon on the phenomenology, although phenomenology he uses it in a different term than I use phenomenology, but a kind of cartography of the experiences of ayahuasca. So if you want to know what sort of stuff might come up, that's a great book written a little while ago that covers the visual effects that tend to be matrices that are overlaid on top of your visual field. There can be sort of degrees of the experience where you right from, well, I know I'm in the room, but I just feel a bit high, something's a bit strange, maybe the carpet's just waving a little bit, through to full-on psychedelic hyperspace where you're in a completely different reality and you don't know that you're in the Maloka anymore. You don't know that you're in that room. You're like a lucid dream. You're fully inhabiting that space. That's at the other end of the spectrum and sort of everything in between. So that was what Shannon set out as a kind of cartography, or a categorization of the experiences that you can go through. I'm interested in what of those is healing, what of those helps people, what insights they get from these things. But as I said, I'm interested really in, do you want to put your hands up if you have something to say or some question or some steering that you can give me? Well, I think that's supposed to be getting on with, isn't it? That's 20 points, which I will now seamlessly answer. Started to regret that. No, it's great. Actually, I'd sort of rather just deal with those, even if I just do them in order as one approach, so that I answer the questions. And some of them may link back to each other, and I'll try and bring in the research that I did. And it's interesting that you've asked a lot of the things that are in the collective unconscious, to use a Jungian term. Things that are out there in the discourses, in the current articles. It's a very lively field, psychedelic research. There's a real renaissance in this, as I'm sure you're aware as members of this society. And some of these questions are how do you embark on that? How do you grip that as if you're young and you're at university and you're looking ahead to a career? Will it spoil it or will it make it? Those are real personal questions for me as well. Let me start with the top of that. My throat is going a little bit. Hopefully I'll get to the end. I've just got a bit of a cold. This first question was from down here about psychotherapy personally and professionally. That's it. That was it. That's the bit that I didn't write down, and that's the important bit. How does it inform my... So as I mentioned, it led me to retrain. So that starts to answer one of the other questions about the did it have long-term effects for me? Yes, it was a career change and a life change for me in many ways, and I'll talk more about what about it did that. But in terms of a lot of psychotherapy doesn't cover spirituality. It tends to be, as I mentioned, diagnostic. So someone comes in and says, well, I've got depression. And you could retranslate that as, I have no meaning in my life. I feel that I have nothing to get out of bed for. I'm being a bit simplistic. And I know that'll miss some things out, but for the sake of argument, if they come in with anxiety, the spiritual dimension of that, by which I mean the possibilities are endlessly unfolding, and you probably should be anxious about it, as in what else are you going to do, isn't talked about very much in psychotherapy. That's the main thing for me, that there's back to the biopsychosocial spiritual, the bio gets all the attention in terms of psychiatry. There's drugs that you take, there's anti-anxiety medications, there's antipsychotic medications. And I'm not arguing against that. I think they all have a place, but there's just a tilt towards it that's a bit overdoing it for my mind. And then the social elements of, well, what if that was Freud's innovation? How has your family affected you? How's your job affecting you? How is Brexit affecting you? How is living under a constant threat of nuclear war affecting you? There's social aspects of life. And how that links into how you feel about yourself on a daily basis. That's important as well. But you've still not got to the, and then the psychological, like how your personality, how your worldview, how you see the world, how you cope, how you get by, what defense mechanisms you have, what coping mechanisms you have. So really, for the simple, it sort of added the spiritual for me, and that transformed how I looked at the other three things. So an idea that, particularly sort of radical empathy, that a typical experience with ayahuasca is of oneness, of a unity, of a kind of the everything's made of the same stuff. I mean, even physics agrees with that. It's all atoms and energy. But it's kind of really identifying with that and kind of moving from a little me to a big mind, what's been called big mind in some of the literature, and kind of thinking that one of my favorite quotes is Horace, who says, I am human, nothing human is beyond me. That what is within someone else's human experience is also intrinsically within my experience, because we're the same sort of being. So if someone calls me up and says that they've lost this, this happened. She said that she'd lost a child recently during or just prior to when the birth was due. She lost that baby and she felt that she'd done something wrong. And she just couldn't forgive herself for having not delivered this baby alive. And she was racked with guilt. And she was hoping that ayahuasca and psychedelics would give her an answer to that. And a lot of psychotherapy says, right, send her to a specialist, send her to a woman, send her to someone that can understand that. And I don't want to overdo my empathy, but I think that there's something profound about grief, about loss, about care, about love, about what's my responsibility, what's not my responsibility, that I can connect to. And that's what I try and do as a psychotherapist. And part of my question really is, well, should psychotherapists take ayahuasca? Could that be part of their practice? I think that's a really good question. I'm going to move on just for time and see how we get on. What conditions is it not suited for? I think that was up here, right? What conditions is it not suited for? So typically, the ayahuasca centers, the responsible centers, will rule out things like schizophrenia, bipolar, anything on the psychotic spectrum. And I did that with my participants as well. Under the ethics, I had to eliminate anybody that had broadly a low sense of self, not a firm grip on consensus reality. I'm not going to say reality, I'll say consensus reality. Those are the people that would be ruled out. And part of me says that's a bit of a shame, because a lot of the time they're exactly the people that need this stuff. So I'm not saying if you've got any of those conditions, you should, get on a flight to Peru tomorrow. You've got to be responsible, and there are reasons for this. But all I can say is it's early days for a lot of this stuff. We've been on a hiatus since the 60s. There was doing a lot of LSD research, a lot of LSD psychotherapy in the 60s. And then it all stopped, as I'm sure you know, and now it's starting up again. And so there's a lot of things we don't know, and caution is definitely advised. So those are the main things that. But if you're asking me what I would recommend, well, I would have to say, I don't recommend or not recommend it to people. And this comes back to the existential principles. What I mean by existentialism is a kind of philosophical approach to people as humans, and one of that is valuing their autonomy and their responsibility for themselves. So unlike a psychiatrist or a GP, I don't take any responsibility for my client, really. They're consulting me, and what they do with what I say to them is up to them. I never remove any of their agency, because that's absolutely vital that they have full access to that. So do your own research, really, and if in doubt, don't do it. You know, we're talking about one of the strongest psychedelics known to mankind. It's crazy strong. Maybe I can answer this jungle strength. What do I mean by that? I mean that, and this relates to a few of the other points as well, that my experience of taking ayahuasca in Costa Rica versus other settings, and what you might call neo-shamanic settings, just to bring it to this point, is, well, every shaman has a different brew. You know, as you say, some people put datura in it, which really gives it a different flavour, whether you think about that in terms of personalities or not. And so there's very admixtures that you can add. And for the Shipibo, the purge is all important, right? So basically, my idea is that they put stuff in the brew that makes you vomit, as I found, right? Because I often don't, you know, I typically won't actually these days, but I really, really, really did, you know, then. And so that for me it's just, you know, it's a different experience of a different concoction that's got a different idea in mind, you know, a different idea of what the ceremony should be.
So it was jungle strength compared to previous ayahuasca brews.
Yeah, so compared to non-jungle settings. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask two?
Of course.
So
follow.
How much of that do you think was actually related to your subjective experience of being in the jungle, as opposed to I don't know what the other settings were? So
Yeah.
how much of that do you think contributed to the actual strength, that the setting, you know, there's a holy trinity of drug setting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how much of that is the setting? And also, what do you think about that in terms of regulation? Because if you're a psychotherapist, an ayahuasca orientated psychotherapist, sending people on these experiences, there's a vast amount of difference of where the substance they're going to consume, depending on where they go, who they go with. So there's this real issue of regulation and stuff like that. What are your ideas about that?
Yeah, well, there's a whole hour's talk in that, and all of the things you've said. I think you know, I'm not. My basic position is towards decriminalisation, and it's aligned with what I said about, you know, in terms of my social position, not as a psychotherapist, not as a person, as a citizen. I think that there should be greater access to drugs of all kinds, including psychedelics. So when you talk about regulation, I'm not necessarily on the same page, because that's about how we regulate it. I mean, I guess there would need to be some regulation, but that, when you said I'd be sending people off, that isn't what would be happening for me. I'd still be taking the position that I just did, which is, well, if you want to go, you can. If you find it useful, you could. And there's information that I can give about it. But it's not for me to recommend, and it's not for me to send people or anything like that. That's their decision that they take. But to answer your question about the substance, substance mindset setting. Hopefully, you're familiar with these aspects of of taking drugs safely, of harm reduction. They're good principles. You can add more in about sitta, particularly about the facilitators that you have, and because, you know, in the Shipibo tradition, it's all about the shaman. You know, he in a sense he's doing the healing. And the Icaros are doing the healing to you, so that in a sense that he's doing something to you. Whereas in other settings, you take the ayahuasca and then you're doing the healing on yourself, which is more aligned with the Western model of things. But yeah, for what it's worth, I can only answer your question by saying it felt much stronger to me, or they gave me more of it, or maybe I asked more of it. And in terms of, then how do you calibrate the dose? I mean, I would play devil's advocate a little bit, that they take the view that, I think, can I speak for them? Not really. It'd be much better to ask this of an indigenous shaman who's working. I'm beyond my area of knowledge here. But they speak to the plant, they speak energetically, they work out what the right dose for you is in that moment. And it's negotiated, it's not just a question of you saying what you want. It's a question of the shaman seeing your energy and seeing what they think you need, and then consulting with the plant spirits and ayahuasca itself, or herself, or himself, and then working it out from there. So it's what I'm always trying to do is sort of get out of the scientific mindset, basically. Of no, you've got to measure the amount of DMT, you've got to analyze the pharmacology. People are doing that, and it's great, but I always wonder what they miss out if they start doing that. You know, that if you prepare it in a lab and Icaros, the medicine songs, haven't been sung into it, then is it ayahuasca? You know, these are questions, and different people come to different answers about them. let me move on to the academic side. It's highly spiritual, how to legitimize it, peer review, and can they trust that knowledge? Yeah, is this your question? Yeah, I mean, I battle with that every day. You know, I've just scraped in under the door at Birkbeck University to do a PhD, and it very nearly didn't happen because you're having to explain what ayahuasca is from scratch to the person who's going to supervise you. So it's terrifying. You know, my master's research got rejected the first time I submitted it for ethical concerns, and I thought, well, that's it. I can't study it. You know. So yeah, with great difficulty, but I hope you all are ready to not fight, but you know, do what you can to engage with this, to push the frontiers, push the boundary. Because for me, I'm getting people phoning me up every week saying that they're at the end of their tether with psychiatric drugs. Maybe they've tried psychotherapy, they've been in psychotherapy for 10 years. They've tried going to the gym, they've tried going for walks, nothing's helped. They're stuck and they can't live, they can't move on. You know, they're suicidal, they're desperate for something. And I don't know whether psychedelics is going to deliver anything to them. I want to find out. And that's what this is about. And that's why more academic, you know, if academia, if the Western, you know, the people are already convinced, you know, you go to Brazil, go to Peru, they don't need any convincing that this is the way forward. But in the West, it's very much unconvinced. It's like, well, if you've got miraculous claims, then you need to find miraculous evidence. You know, there needs to be a really strong evidence base for this. And I sort of get that. So there's a cultural bridging that needs to happen. And that requires people to do it. And I'm planning to be one of them, to, as much as possible, be sort of bicultural, to be able to speak the language of quantitative science and I can't even say it, how am I going to do that? Of, you know, genetics, of doing saliva swabs. And that's why my next phase of research, I'll just mention that briefly next, is in conjunction with the Institute of Psychiatry. So my next phase of research is qualitative research, which means talking to people, doing interviews, having a human-human interaction. This is why I've got no slides. You know, this is why I'm talking to you, because that's what matters to me. It's alive. It's now. You know, I'm not giving you yesterday's ideas. I want to give you the ideas that come up with me right now. And there's a humanity to that and aliveness to it. And that's what is often taken out of a lot of the research that comes out of the journals as they stand so far. So my attitude is to sort of try and bridge that. So we're doing it in conjunction with King's College and the Institute of Psychiatry and the medical doctors and the psychiatrists that are working there to co-research and co-develop research that looks at the richness of subjective experience, which comes back to these questions about, well, what is it? And the answer is, I could say more about what within my experiences has helped. I mean, for instance, oh God, am I going to say this? Yes, I think I am. Like, being gay, right? That, like, ayahuasca, sexuality, sort of root chakra, you might call it, that came up in a big way for me in one ceremony. And like, first, I thought I needed to, like, things about sexual shame, things about a kind of uncomfortableness that's, you know, again, it's there in the social sphere. I kind of all the homophobia that you get, you know, even from Manchester, where I'm from, you know, it's everywhere. You know, went to a boys' school, and you know, being gay was the worst possible thing you could be. You know, if that was ever picked up on by anyone else, you were socially dead. You know, you would be eliminated, and you know, the rate of suicide among gay teenagers and trans is enormous. It's ridiculously high. For these reasons, that's in the 20 years since that was my situation. That's still not changed. And so ayahuasca for me helped me see that sexuality is sacred and that it's okay. It's genuinely okay. It's not just let's pretend it's okay. It's actually really, really okay. And that allowed me to really accept a part of myself that I was struggling with otherwise. And then the next time I went in, I got this, what are you even talking about? This idea of sexuality as gendered. That just seemed absurd to me. Like, why pick that? You know, why pick the gender of the person rather than the length of their hair or the, you know, the size of their ears or, you know, whether they like Avengers movies. You know, just why not base your sexuality on that? And some people do. They're like really into red leather boots or something. That's what they're attracted to. It's not men or women. It could be anyone wearing red leather boots. They just like red leather boots. But we don't conceive of sexuality like that. So there was something really, again, it's this kind of pushing through the kind of oneness thing, just kind of getting out from these silos that we stand in. It's like, I'm a man, well, I'm a woman, well, I'm gay, well, I'm straight, as if we're all separate and can't therefore understand each other. And I'm saying this in the light of Brexit and all these divisive discourses. And kind of realising that there's something underneath that. There's this ground of existence that is shared, fundamentally shared. And you can say that philosophically and say, oh, that's a nice idea, Adam, that's great. Yeah, sounds good. Read it in a book, put it back on the shelf. But to have a visceral experience of that, where you become your female partner, where you become an amoeba, you become a bacteria, you become the thing that crawled out of the sea billions of years ago, and then you experience all the evolution happening, which I've done a couple of times. Try it, it's great. You become a fish, and then you kind of grow legs, and then you get eyes, and they just see light for a bit. So that you're just sort of that you are connected. You either are everything or you're connected to everything. Change my worldview, change my perspective. And that was one of my research findings. That was my third theme that I found in my research, that it's not just me saying that. That the qualitative research, the interpretive phenomenological analysis I did, showed that a shift in perspective. A lot of the people that are using ayahuasca for PTSD are finding this, that the change in perspective is what's helpful for them. The participant that theme came from, her words were that she inhabited her father's psyche. So she couldn't work out why her father was such a bad dad, because he was useless, he was drunk, he was abusive, he was violent, he was really horrible man. And she couldn't forgive him. She couldn't, for not being there for her, not being her dad. You just couldn't, because, when you come into the world, anybody that's already there has lived forever as far as you're concerned, but they haven't. They were born too, and they had a childhood too. And that's what she realized, that when she inhabited the psyche of her father when he was 5 and realized how bad a situation he was in his childhood, and realized the cause and effect, in a sense, that it was intergenerational trauma, and therefore it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault. She's full of this blame, this hurt. She wants to pin it on someone, pin it on something, and kick it. I understand that, but how far back do you want to go? The universe is full of death, it's full of life. Yin and yang push each other around, and you see that, and then you know it. Speaking personally again, and there's a release. You could call it forgiveness. You could call it perspective. There's just breathing in and breathing out, and that's what the universe is doing all the time. And it's the good stuff, it's the bad stuff, and all those judgments, they just seem so silly almost. And this is, again, it's not just me that's saying this. It was me that conducted the research, so maybe my biases are showing them, maybe they are. But that's the nature of qualitative research. And that's something that I would defend, that, we are never free from a context. I am, the nature of this talk, as I said to you, I'm changing it based on you, if you hadn't come, I might not be saying this, right? If any single one of you hadn't come to this talk, the whole trajectory of it could have changed in a sort of chaos theory, butterfly effect sort of way, right? Whereas if I just had my slides and I knew exactly, and it was all rehearsed, then you wouldn't get that, And that's what science tries to do. It tries to make things replicable, tries to make things peer-reviewed, you said, so that we can repeat them, because then it counts as knowledge. And I'm saying, well, what's new, what's unique, what's different about each time? Because time has moved on, time's changed, and that means everything's changed. Things are not in the same place, Now, that's no good if you want to get in an aeroplane. You want to know that the aeroplane's going to take off. I get that, right? But not everything's an aeroplane. And what definitely doesn't work like an aeroplane is the human, or as Heidegger called it, Dasein. This is we often talk of ourselves, and I have clients that talk of themselves as machines. They say they're compulsively addicted to pornography or cocaine, or they can't help. Just try and think of my client work without breaking any confidentiality. These are the typical things that they feel compelled to do things as if there's no agency, as if there's no choice, as if they're a machine. And my basic job is to show them through evidence from their own life that they are a machine that's constantly, magically, like the staircases in Harry Potter or something, always shifting based on what they encounter to envelop it and change it. And so the me of today, I've got this sore throat today. I didn't on Saturday. So it changes how I feel, changes the context, it changes who I am, changes what Adam is. It's constantly evolving and flowing. So
what are the metrics then? If you have to fit into this research peg, what are you measuring as progress in the minds of your humans? Like, what do you have to report? I don't want to be the science bit, but I'm genuinely...
No, thank you. No, I can't blame you for that question, because it's the question that people ask. They say, where's the placebo control? Where's the control group? Where's the, what are you measuring? And so my answer to that is be bicultural, right? So measure things. My colleague will be measuring depression indexes, mystical experience questionnaires. They'll be doing genetic sequencing, like genome level stuff, to look for if there's any biomarkers of predisposition to depression or something like that. But I'm going to leave them to it, right? Because I love that stuff. I'll read their reports and I'm colleagues with them. What I want to do is say the measure is the self-report of the human experience, and the only thing that I then do is try and thematize that. So that's what I did in my research. I then sort of pulled it back to 5. So I came up with 5 themes, which were the insight leads to changes, the perspective is important, the question of ayahuasca as a drug versus a plant medicine versus a religious sacrament came up for them. The question of, what was the 4th one? This is within an intercultural exchange, which a lot of the questions have been about, the neo-shaman, what I'm calling neo-shamanism, taking it in non-traditional context. What was the 4th one? Let me just get it. The different paths of healing. I've already said it, actually. The fact that ayahuasca is one thing amongst many. It's one thing amongst other psychedelics. Is LSD similar to that? Let me answer that question. I think pharmacologically, that it seems to act on the same serotonin. I can't say it. Can't say it. Someone else say it. Serotonin. That's it. Say it again.
Serotonin.
That's it. Receptors, 528. I don't know. So its action in the brain seems to be quite similar. You'll all have seen the things like Michael Pollan's book, where you've got the brain scans and MRI scanners, and it shows the brain not on psychedelics, so there's a few connections, then brain on psilocybin, there's loads of connections. It's all about the default mode network. So, I think DMT, LSD, and ayahuasca, have something in common in terms of the subjective experience that you'll have. But my understanding is that the quality of that and what you see and particularly the way they're taken, back to sort of this question, the setting and the mindset. There are a lot more, the people I've met taking LSD, they're doing it at psytrance festivals, which is great, but they're not, I like to say that, I might edit that a bit. But ayahuasca is generally taken in a ritual context. There's some onboarding process where they try and filter out the people that it's not going to be good for, or at least warn about it, so that you've got informed consent. And there's shamans, and there's songs, and there's amulets and crystals, and what the shaky thing is called?
The rattle.
The rattle. Yeah, it's got another name, hasn't it? Yeah, they're like maracas. Little kind of shuffly leaf things. They're really cool. Anyway, they're all part of it, and they kind of really rhythmically sort of induce you into this. It's horrible. Don't do it. Don't take ayahuasca. It's horrible. No, do. If it's right. It's So the ritual aspects of the use of it changes it. As you say, the setting, the sitter, the substance, all work together. And it's the same as saying the biopsychosocial spiritual. It's not just the substance. It's how you take it, where you take it, who you're with, what mindset you're in, how you approached it, where you're in your life. All of these things really matter, and a lot of them don't get talked about. They're assumed that you'll get the same effect. Like there's this reductionist idea, basically, that you can reduce ayahuasca to a pill that will be a sort of pharmahuasca, which will contain some DMT and maybe some of the other bits out of ayahuasca, and that you can give it to someone. The doctor can say, all right, well, prescription for ayahuasca, thank you very much, and you go and take it home, and somehow it will have the same healing effects as doing it in the jungle with a 30-year trained shaman. And I mean, okay, that's a bit extreme. Probably no one believes that, but the nature of the trials that are going on at Imperial College. So Imperial College has a psychedelic research centre. King's College is doing more and more psychedelic research, particularly on psilocybin. That relates to a question about kind of where does it sit in the substances. Way down the list, right? Yeah, I mean, we're early in term, right? We're talking about ayahuasca. I think that's brilliant. But yeah, generally psilocybin, MDMA is way up the list. That's about to be legalized and regulated in the States. They're training about 300 psychotherapists to deliver MDMA-based therapy under the MAPS program in the USA at the moment. So there's a movement in this direction. Ayahuasca is a tricky one because it's the least, I want to say it's the least easy to fit into the existing model. So the assumption is that we can just add it on, to psychiatry and medicine, and my idea, even my hope, if I'm honest, is it might break things, because those aspects of the setting, the sitter, and the relationship between a shaman or a psychotherapist. In psychotherapy, we say it's all about the relationship. We often say that, it's not about the techniques that you do, the worksheets that you do, the scores, the practices, the dream work. There's a good argument, and I've experienced it myself, that all of that is distracting the patient whilst the real work happens, which is a reparative relationship between the two individuals in the room, which heals something, which allows them to experience something, allows the client, in my language, to experience something that they've not experienced before, whether that's unconditional love, whether it's warmth, whether it's acceptance of something that they thought was completely unacceptable, whether it's a different perspective that they haven't seen before. So, and that's the socio bit of biopsychosocial spiritual, that the relationship between shaman, the relationship of psychotherapy to the psychedelics is really important. And it comes back to how we do, because the other thing is to get away from this idea of a ceremony or, going to do ayahuasca as if it's a one-off thing. That's an assumption as well. The Santo Daime, they'll be taking it regularly in a community, an ongoing community that has a longevity where they'll support each other, like way beyond the ceremony. If maybe someone needs a loan of 50 quid, maybe someone, needs to crash for needs a bed for the night in some other city, they'll help each other in a religious community. So there's this sense of, and again, nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that as a potential model for what we do over here. It's just seen as you go into hospital, and as if it's a leg operation, you get your leg worked on and then you go home and life carries on as normal. And there are other models, and it's what I'm basically in favour of, is small groups with autonomy, working out their own rules, with sufficient information, so that there's consent, and so that there's informed consent for what they're getting into, and that they can leave at any time, so it's not a cult, and that they can proceed in the way that they want. So you might have an LGBT circle over here, and you might have a group for autism here, you might have a group just for women here. But people can spontaneously create those things if they're allowed to do it. But the current sort of paternalistic legal situation is such that they can't. That's where we are. Any follow-up questions from that bit? I feel like I've talked for a long time. Any follow-up points?
Briefly mentioned people with autism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I've seen videos and read some things on Arabic and stuff about how more specifically LSD and MDMA affect people on the spectrum differently.
Right.
What do you think about ayahuasca? Obviously, it's not going to fix what doesn't need to be fixed.
Yeah.
How do you think it's interesting that it would respond differently with their brain and their behaviour, and I guess maybe even potentially aid in research in a weird way? I don't know how to say that.
I hope you go ahead and research that. Is what I think. It sounds fascinating. Yeah, autism. I just pulled it out of nowhere, but it's obviously what people call neuroatypical. There's this increasing idea, isn't there, of neuroatypical, which again, philosophically, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there's any. Maybe other people here know more about it than I do. Maybe there's a neuroscientist somewhere here. Yes. Sure.
brother has autism,
Right.
and obviously the way we perceive the world is different to the way. Would like psychedelics help me somehow understand and better communicate and get stronger bond?
Really interesting question. I mean, based on what I've said so far, I no guarantees with anything, right? But in terms of the empathy that you get and the connection, and there's some people talk about feelings of telepathy, for instance, during the experience. So there's a possibility there that might be worth you exploring. As I say, I'm not in a position to recommend or disrecommend anything to you, but it's within the realm of what people talk about, for sure. And it's what I've talked about, the connection between people is what my participants talked about in terms of the change of perspective. Like I say, one participant inhabited their father. If you were able to make a neural connection. But for me, I just struggle a bit with the focus on brains, basically, because I think we're way more than brains. You know, there are neurons in the gut, more than there are in the head of a cat, I understand. That there's a whole body involved. And then there's and the body's permeable, right? It's exchanging oxygen. And I don't want to get too much into this, but philosophically, like, there's a bit of an obsession with putting the brain in an MRI scanner and then looking at how it's wired and then rewiring it or something. And then saying, oh, they have a different experience of the world. It's like, well, yeah, maybe they do, but I have a different experience of the world to you. Maybe there's a group of people that you can say, well, their experience of the world in this respect, it has something in common in a way that this set of people doesn't. And that's what we seem to be talking about with autism. But one thing I understand that it's sort of behaviorally diagnosed, right? I have a friend actually who diagnoses it in Manchester. And she said, well, you just know, right? She, I trust her with my life. A very caring, wonderful, fully trained doctor with 20 years experience, right? What are the diagnostic criteria for autism? You know, do you have a checklist? Do you have a computer program you have to check? She's like, not really. It's obvious, she says. But my point is, it's not diagnosed by a brain scan. So if there is a difference in wiring, then I'd be interested in responses to this, but from someone who's more qualified than I am. But I'm just curious about it. Because for me, mind being a thing that brain does, the hard problem of consciousness comes into play. And I'm just going to leave that there. If you know what that means, feel free to engage with it in your own thoughts. If you don't, look it up. It's fabulous. It's a philosophical question of what we are, and again, do our brains dictate us? Do our genetics dictate us? Do our epigenetics dictate us? Or are they only part of the picture? I'm just really curious. I'm going to move on if that's all right, unless there's any urgent.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's not really related to what you just said.
Okay, great. Let's go off on a tangent. Go on.
I was just wondering, and I'm not really sure what the name of the word is, but I was wondering about the opposite of healing.
The opposite of healing.
Yeah, and
Harm.
how was the ayahuasca research on that?
Yeah.
What are incidents you experience?
Yeah.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous point. I'll pick that up if I may. Sorry to put you ahead of the people who saw you earlier. I'll try and get there. We're on about. Are we okay for time? For a bit? Is this okay, by the way? Is this sort of interesting? Am I on the right track? Does anybody want the money back? That pound. Yeah, I mean, God, it's hurt me. That's why I started with that story, right? It's traumatizing. Some people talk about it being re-traumatizing in a sort of unboundaried way. Did I consent to that experience? Well, apart from my negotiation with a shaman who speaks a completely different language, not even Spanish, but Shipibo, right, primarily, you're negotiating over the dose. Do they really understand what you're saying when you say a bit more, a bit less? Or there's a translator, but right, they gave me this glass, right? And apparently, when they transported it to Costa Rica, they this speaks to your question about the measurements as well. They take the water out of it, they concentrate it into a sort of ayahuasca cordial. Can you imagine that? And that's what they import because it's lighter and less bulky. And then they reconstitute it on site. So it's prepared in the traditional way, and all the icaros, etc. And then the point is that you've got to mix it properly, right? And I think what happened to me is that an unmixed bit, like blob of ayahuasca got into the bottom of my drink before I had this experience that I've just talked to you about. So did I consent to that? I don't know, but I got a lot from it. And again, one of the findings in my research was that it's difficult but worth it. All of them said that there were terrifying experiences that happened with ayahuasca, but none of them said that that resulted in long-term harm amongst my participants. I am familiar in the literature of other cases where there is, there's a thing called HPPD, hallucinogen persisting disorder, perceptual persisting disorder, where you're constantly locked after strong psychedelics. It tends to be associated with LSD. There's no records of it associated with ayahuasca yet, but again, it's early days and we're only starting to look at this and record things, of being lost in a dream world, basically, where that getting in touch with consensus. Now that sounds pretty harmful to me. If you go basically what you describe as psychotic afterwards, that's not a good result for anyone. And it does, you hear of anecdotes and case studies of that happening. And people have died in situations associated with ayahuasca. From what my reading of it, it's never that they took it, had a heart attack and died. It's that the setting was incorrect. So there was one where a guy fell off a motorbike. After they were trying to take him to hospital and he fell off the back of the motorbike, hit his head. That was the English guy actually. He was 19-year-old Harry Miller. Yeah. Henry. It's really, it's like, it's really bad. But it comes back to this set and setting. If you get that right, you reduce the instances of harm down to it's never nothing. It's never negligible. But as Professor David Nutt would say, it's safer than riding a horse. That's what we're talking about. You've got to look at the risk profile of it overall. And when you do that with a scientific view or just a common sense, reasonable view, then you would conclude, or I've concluded, that it has an appropriate safety profile for most people. But does that answer your question? Yeah. Experience or opinion of traditional ceremonies versus retreats in the West. Yeah. So my fifth theme was intercultural exchange. Bia Labacha, who is my brilliant ayahuasca researcher, leading the field in so many ways. She runs the Chacruna Institute for Plant Medicines, which I collaborated with for a long time. And she has published the sexual abuse guidelines with Daniela Peluso, who's here, which are worth checking out. Particularly if you're planning to join a ceremony, check out the guidelines for sexual abuse published by Chacruna, disseminated across conferences across the world. And Bia is written, she's an anthropologist by trade, and she talks a lot about the cultural exchanges that go on between. And this relates to another question about how to do it sort of respectfully, how to do it. You want a proper, you want an authentic experience. What does that mean? But B, you want to do something that doesn't rip off the community, that doesn't, cultural appropriation comes in. These are really urgent questions. It's worth engaging with them. It's too much for me to cover right now. Bea has written some great books on the expanding diaspora of ayahuasca. And there's 3 books actually that her and Clancy Kavanagh have produced, all about that stuff really. About there's a lot of one of the most interesting things for me. Daniel could talk more about the anthropological aspect, but there's kind of romanticism of the traditional ceremonies that they never. It was always done for free in the olden days, and now they charge money. It's not quite true. There was always some exchange of value, or that in commercializing it, if ayahuasca becomes commercialized, that's not what they want. And for a start, there is no they. There is no homogenous. There's no trade organization that can speak for ayahuasca. Unfortunately, there's a few attempts to do that. But different people have different ideas, and often these, Brazil and Peru and Ecuador and Costa Rica, they're not rich countries, to put it bluntly. And if you don't want them selling the rainforests and things, then, this is one of their natural resources. Why not monetize it? If that's what they want, you have this kind of weird opposite of consent where you don't allow them to develop their interests and make money off it and, become millionaires if you want, I don't care. But there is something about doing that in conjunction with the community, which and again, I would signpost you to the articles on the Chacruna website, chacruna.net, for that, because it's really strong on how to look for a center and a ceremony and a shaman that looks legit and that is done in a mindful and respectful way, respectful of the plant, respectful of the planet, environmentally secure, where the people involved have, for instance, the shaman, do they have voting rights or are they just employed? Do they have to go where they're told, etc.? These are really important points. It's important to engage in. Again, it's not really my area. Diet was asked about. So I just want to make one point about that, really, which is that the dieta is about much more than food. It's about what you're taking in across all. So, about what movies you're watching in the week before, what people you're interacting with, whether you're, so it's about your holistic intake and how important is it and how much does it contribute to the, again, it's sort of outside the medical model. So there's usually a period of fasting. You might go juice only or drinks only. Certainly you simplify the diet, you cut out, sometimes pork is taboo for a period before and after. Alcohol, caffeine, sex are all prohibited by a lot of the rules. And that is a very important part of the experience according to a lot of the people that do it. But in light of what I was saying about the cultural exchange, that gets reinvented. And how much of it is based on superstition in a sense, or ritual, legit ritual, and how much of it is based on the knowledge of the body. For instance, tyramine, kind of fermented product, has been hypothesized to be problematic to take with ayahuasca, but it's just entered the knowledge, and no one's ever really, it's a hypothetical risk rather than a real one that's been explored. LSD talks about what's unique about it. I think I've said a little bit about that. I was interested in this question about plant personalities. There's a lady called Laura Dev who wrote in one of Beer's books about interspecies listening. That's a great paper. I think it's available for free online. Of again, obliterating the pharmacological view of ayahuasca and considering ayahuasca as a person. Ayahuasca has also written a manifesto. One of my participants told me about this. There's an ayahuasca manifesto that's being dictated via another person. And you might say, well, that sounds crazy. Maybe you're right. But it's another metaphor. It's another way of looking at this that we can. It just opens things up. I always encourage that. Like, switch your metaphor, switch your mythology, switch your lens, switch your perspective, switch your worldview, and you see other things. You're always highlighting one thing, and other things fall into the background. And if you're always highlighting what's replicable and what's provable and what multiple people agree on, then you might be hiding what is more esoteric and what. But those could be really valuable ideas. And one of them for me is this idea of interspecies listening. As ayahuasca often appears, I don't know if this happens with LSD, for instance, because LSD is a manufactured thing, right, in a lab, as far as I know. And that's a bit different to two plants, stick them together in a pot, heat them up and stir it around for a while and then drink it. So there's a different origin to it, sort of natural versus man-made, let's say. And a lot of people, you look at Benny Shannon's stuff, you look at my research, they'll talk about ayahuasca as a person, or as a being, as an incarnate entity, or a disincarnate entity, actually, as this thing that speaks to you, that you can have a relationship with. Mama Aya, is how she's appeared to me. Strangely enough, in the form of the goddess Azura from the Elder Scrolls series. That's how she appeared to me. I don't know why. That was my image of this kind of divine feminine character with holding a crescent moon and a sun. Awesome. And when she turns up, you listen, Other people think of ayahuasca as a grandfather, as a very, really wise old guy that's kind of, isn't going to shout, isn't going to hit you with it, isn't going to make you do anything, but you can just, climb up the stairs and go and consult, and they'll pass on some age-old wisdom that you really could do with listening to. So I think that's a really interesting idea. It's something that I'd like to play with a bit more. It's quite a creative way into it.
Quickly, who was the author of the Interspecies Listening?
Laura Dev, D-E-V. Thank you. Laura Dev. Yeah, it's really good. It's in one of his books. Should Aya be paired with San Pedro or John alone? So this comes back into the mix. The Chacruna, every shaman has their own mix. I don't think I have taken it with San Pedro, to be honest. So it can be done. It can be done on its own. Is that better? Well, it depends what you're looking for. It's not. Otherwise, it's not really something I can speak to. A lot of the time, there's not a real transparency over what it is you're taking. Is that good? Is that bad? Do you trust them? Do you not trust them? It doesn't come with an ingredients label on the list like at Pret a Manger. And that's a problem, I've not heard of any sort of allergic reactions to any of the ingredients, but certainly, if you put tobacco in, so tobacco is often called the master, tobacco is sometimes called the father of ayahuasca. So if ayahuasca is a female spirit, then tobacco is a male spirit. And some people put tobacco in the drink, and that wouldn't work for me. Tobacco is a very big part of the traditional ceremonies, of course, and the pacha that they smoke all the way through. And what else have we got? How to navigate finding ceremony in the Amazon. Yeah, I think I've said a bit more about that. Look at Chacruna, look at how to locate a good ceremony that's sustainable, etc. And and to your question, I think it was your question. How did I train to become a psychotherapist? And maybe I'll look to wrap up now. It's 8:20. I was happy in my life. I had a good time, really. I was earning money. I was programming, doing digital marketing. I was, I was getting on with things, saving for a house and all that sort of thing. And then, as I said, ayahuasca and other things for me, or the systems of healing. And that's how I see ayahuasca. It's not just a one hit, it's a system, a bit like yoga. Everyone thinks, we'll do a yoga class, but they forget about the diet and they forget about the mindset. They forget about the meditation aspects. There's the 8 limbs of yoga. I wonder what the 8 limbs of ayahuasca might be, So for me, engaging with a number of those things from different traditions in a quite eclectic way led to a reevaluation for me. And so I tentatively, I didn't have a great plan. I don't know how I ended up in front of you today. It just sort of happened. It's wonderful. You just put one foot in front of the other and you make the decisions as based on principles, of what you care about. Like, it's overused phrase of trust your instinct, but, work out what you care about and pursue that. And for me, it was this service. It was this spending a third of life serving people and humanity as best I can. And so I went to Regent's University London, and I was very lucky to discover an existential, kind of continental philosophical view of psychotherapy, which has really been provocative. I had no idea what issues I had before that. I thought I was all right. It turns out really not. If you want a room of really messed up people, go to day 1 of psychotherapy training. It's quite something. So I went from someone that I've already mentioned the sector of shame, but things like gambling addictions and alcohol, problematic relationship with alcohol, perfectionism, many things that you could diagnose if you want. I never did, and depression. My experience over time with the different paths of healing, the many ways up the mountain, have all led me to here, where I'm much more settled, and I feel solid and ready to work, and that's what I'm about to do. That's why I've committed the next 6-7 years of my life to study for this PhD at Birkbeck University, studying ayahuasca and psychotherapy. And my hope in that is to sort of answer my question that came to me as I was crawling along the floor of that Maloko in the pool of my own sick, of how is this going to be healing? I hope to have given you something of an idea tonight of some of the ways that it might be. And perhaps I'll leave it there.